Most adults can no longer fully splay their toes. The fix takes 30 days.
From Joyo Barefoot, this is Ground Truth, Season 1, Episode 2, Wide Toe Box Shoes. 30-day experiment that changed my balance.
Average U.S. shoe toe box? 95 millimeter. Foot at full splay. 103 millimeters. The 8 millimeter gap is where bunions live.
Today's deep dive takes us through, well, decades of sports medicine research. We are pulling from papers spanning 1991 all the way to 2019, and looking at some internal data, too.
Right. Our mission is to figure out exactly how closing that tiny 8 millimeter gap rewires the human body.
Yeah, like how it rebuilds intrinsic foot muscles and, completely changes your sense of balance.
And just to be clear up front, we are just two people who read the literature closely. We do not hold medical degrees or, professional titles.
No, we just follow the data. We rely on the published work of actual experts, people like Daniel Lieberman at Harvard, Irene Davis, Phil Maffetone, and Steve Magnus.
Exactly. So based entirely on the academic literature and a specific 30-day observational experiment, we are investigating the physical reality of forcing a 103 millimeter object into a 95 millimeter space every single day.
For most of our waking hours, yeah.
When you just look at the geometry of it, the concept seems absurd.
It really does. I mean, that 8 millimeter discrepancy sounds tiny on a ruler. It is less than a centimeter. But when we examine the published research, that specific gap is fundamentally altering human biomechanics.
Because of the natural alignment of the foot, right?
Right. When you are barefoot and bearing weight, your toes are designed to fan out. The big toe specifically should point straight ahead.
Continuing the natural line of that first metatarsal bone.
Exactly, creating a wide, stable base. But a 95 millimeter toe box tapers at the end. It physically forces the big toe to angle inward toward the second toe.
So over time, this mechanical restriction alters the entire lever system of the foot. The big toe can no longer anchor you or push off efficiently during walking.
It cannot. You are essentially neutralizing your main anchor point.
I am picturing this like wearing a tight corset on your feet.
That is a great way to think about it.
You know that universal feeling of relief when you kick off a pair of stiff dress shoes after a wedding or a long day at the office? Your foot literally expands. It breathes.
Oh, yeah, we all know that feeling.
But back in the day, historical corsets were known to rearrange internal organs over time. So looking at the actual bone structure of the foot, is this daily compression from standard shoes permanently changing our bones? Or is it just temporarily squishing soft tissue while the shoe is on?
Well, it is definitely not a temporary squish. Over decades, it changes the structural alignment.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The bones themselves might not melt and reform like wax, but the connective tissues, the ligaments, and the joint capsules, they all adapt to the position they are forced into most often.
So they get stuck that way.
Right. The big toe joint, which is known clinically as the metatarsophalangeal joint, becomes chronically misaligned. Because the joint is no longer sitting flush, the cartilage wears down unevenly. And the body responds to this constant abnormal stress by laying down extra bone at the base of the big toe. It does that to protect the joint from the friction.
And that bony growth is what we call a bunion.
That is exactly what a bunion is.
So a bunion is not just genetic bad luck. It is a direct biological adaptation to an 8 millimeter math problem.
It is a mechanical response, yeah. The foot is adapting to the restrictive environment of the shoe. When you remove that restriction by switching to a wide toe box, you stop forcing the big toe inward.
You give the structural framework the spatial freedom to return to its natural alignment.
Right. But as you said, we take the corset off, and we are left with a foot that has basically been locked in a cast for years.
Which brings us to the muscle tissue. I want to look at the 2019 paper by Sarah Ridge and her colleagues, published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise.
Yes, the intrinsic muscle study.
Right. These are the tiny muscles that start and end entirely within the foot itself. Traditional shoes are so rigid they act like splints, meaning the intrinsic muscles just atrophy.
They literally shrink.
But Ridge used MRI scans to prove that walking in minimalist shoes physically grew these muscles. I was blown away that they could capture that morphological change on a scan.
The MRI imaging is what makes the Ridge study so compelling. They wanted to see if simply walking in minimalist shoes is an effective way to strengthen foot muscles.
Just walking.
Just walking. They took people who normally wore traditional shoes and had them gradually increase their walking time in minimalist footwear over a period of weeks.
And the scans showed a difference.
A huge difference. The imaging showed significant increases in the actual physical size and strength of those intrinsic muscles, just from the simple act of walking without all that artificial support.
See, I am naturally dubious of the idea that passive walking is truly enough of a stimulus to rebuild atrophied muscles.
Why is that?
Because if my bicep is weak, I cannot just passively swing my arm to build it back up. I have to lift weights. I have to apply heavy resistance.
Right, that makes sense.
So is a 30-day timeline even realistic for seeing measurable physical changes in the foot without doing targeted, aggressive exercises like towel scrunches or resistance band work?
It is a fair skepticism. But to understand why walking is enough, we look at a 2017 study by K. Hollander and his team, published in the journal Sports Medicine.
Okay.
They tracked the effects of footwear on intrinsic foot muscle morphology across multiple studies. Morphology just refers to the physical form and structure of the muscle.
Right.
What Hollander documented is that the foot is completely unique. It is the only part of the body that bears our entire body weight against gravity every single time we move.
Wait, so every step is essentially a repetition of a weightlifting exercise for those intrinsic muscles.
Exactly.
If I am taking 8 to 10,000 steps a day, that is thousands of micro-contractions.
Yes, thousands of repetitions under load.
Wow.
In a standard shoe with built-in arch support and a narrow toe box, the shoe acts as a rigid splint. The muscles are bypassed.
But put that same foot in a wide toe box with a flat, flexible sole?
And suddenly, those muscles have to control the deformation of the arch. They have to control the splay of the toes under the full load of your body weight.
Wow.
Hollander's review confirmed that this constant low-level stimulus leads to measurable increases in the physical girth of those tiny foot muscles.
That makes perfect sense, actually. The sheer volume of steps compensates for the lack of heavy resistance.
Exactly.
The Ridge study showed it on the MRI, and Hollander explained the mechanism. But regarding the 30-day timeline, I imagine peak physical changes take months.
They do take months for peak changes.
Yet the neurological activation and initial muscle tone improvements probably begin almost immediately.
They begin the moment you take the cast off. The foot starts working again. The arch begins to act like a natural spring instead of relying on a foam insert.
So we have covered the mechanical space and rebuilding the physical muscle. Here's where the research gets truly fascinating to me.
The brain connection.
Yes. How does the brain communicate with this newly awakened foot?
That connects directly to balance and proprioception. Proprioception is your nervous system's ability to sense the position and movement of your body in space.
Right, feeling where you are.
And the sole of your foot is packed with mechanoreceptors. These are sensory nerve endings that detect pressure, stretch, and texture.
They're reading the ground constantly.
All day long. There is a classic paper from 1991 by Stephen Robbins and Gouw, published in Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise.
I read this one.
This paper is incredible because they concluded that athletic footwear creates perceptual illusions that actually make the shoes unsafe.
Unsafe. Applying the word unsafe to modern athletic shoes sounds wild.
It does sound extreme today.
People spend hundreds of dollars on highly engineered, thick-soled running shoes, specifically to be safe and protect their joints. How do Robbins and Gouw justify calling them unsafe?
It comes down to the mechanism behind that perceptual illusion. Standard padding in athletic shoes blocks sensory feedback to the nervous system. The thick foam acts as an insulator. When your foot hits the ground barefoot, those mechanoreceptors send a rapid signal to your spinal cord and brain. They tell it exactly how hard the impact is so your muscles can adjust their stiffness to absorb the shock safely.
Wait, listening to this is a thick shoe sole, essentially just a sensory blindfold for the central nervous system.
That is a great analogy, yes.
Is it tricking the brain into stepping harder because it cannot feel the ground?
That is the exact mechanism they described in 1991. When you wear a heavily cushioned shoe, the impact feels soft to the skin of the foot. That is the perceptual illusion.
Oh, I see.
Because the brain perceives a soft surface due to the blindfold, it commands the leg to strike the ground harder. The brain is looking for a stable platform.
So the padding reduces the feeling of impact on the skin, but it actually increases the physical impact force traveling up your bones and into your joints.
Right.
The brain is basically saying, I cannot feel the floor, let me stomp a little harder until I find it.
Precisely.
And all that excess force goes straight into the knees, the hips, and the lower back.
That is the reality of the sensory blindfold. Impact forces travel right up the kinetic chain. But when we bring this back to the wide toe box, it is not just about the thickness of the sole.
Right, the width matters too.
When your toes are squished into a 95 millimeter point, your base of support is artificially narrowed. Your brain receives compromised sensory data from a narrow, numb platform.
But when you open that space up to 103 millimeters, your toes splay.
Yeah.
The big toe anchors the inside, the pinky toe anchors the outside.
Jesus.
The blindfold comes off, and the brain suddenly has a wide, high-definition sensory map to calculate balance. You are no longer wobbling on a point. You are standing on a tripod.
Which fundamentally changes how you move through the world.
When you realize how heavily the brain relies on that 103 millimeter sensory map, you start to wonder when exactly we lose it.
Right.
We have been deep in academic literature from 1991 through 2019. Let us look at some current real-world observations regarding how fast this sensory blindfold affects human development.
From the Joyo workshop.
Exactly.
What?
Maya is Joyo's barefoot tester.
She has an incredibly rigorous role. Maya has spent 4 years wearing every shoe Joyo ships for 4 weeks before approval.
That is a lot of testing.
She measures the soles in millimeters, and she measures the toe boxes specifically at the metatarsal line.
I have her tester log note right here, and I'm going to read this exactly as she wrote it, paying attention to her specific punctuation. Quote, I measured 31 kids' feet at a Joyo pop-up. 22 were under age 6, all could fully splay. By age 12, only 4 of 9 could. Shoes don't reverse fast, but they slow what nature wants to do.
Looking at the raw numbers from her observation, the adaptation happens much faster than we think.
It is a total intellectual shock. We're talking about a massive decline in splayability between age 6 and age 12.
Just 6 years.
At age 6, every single kid in her sample had feet functioning exactly as nature intended. 6 years later, the majority have already lost that mechanical ability.
They go to school, they start wearing stiffer shoes.
They were narrower athletic shoes for sports. It begs a terrifying question. What does this mean for an adult trying to reverse decades of damage in just 30 days if we are losing our natural foot function that incredibly fast as children?
Well, it highlights that the adaptation to restrictive footwear happens rapidly during those developmental years. Children's bones are still somewhat cartilaginous and malleable.
Right.
The soft tissue tightens quickly to adapt to the shape of the shoe. From adult, the 30-day mark is not about magically reversing 30 years of structural bone change. You will not erase a severe bunion in a month.
That makes sense.
The 30 days is about waking up the neurological pathways and beginning the morphological shift in the muscle tissue that Hollander and Ridge documented. It is about stopping the artificial restriction.
So what does this mean for you, the listener, this week?
Good question.
We understand what standard shoes do to a developing foot. We understand the 8 millimeter spatial deficit. We see how the MRI research from Ridge and Hollander shows the intrinsic muscles can be corrected.
And how Robbins and Gouw explain the proprioceptive blindfold.
Right. So how do you actually execute the 30-day experiment safely?
The 30-day protocol is a direct synthesis of the biomechanical and neurological adaptations we just covered. The goal is to spend 30 days systematically exposing your feet to a wide toe box environment to rebuild the intrinsic muscles and improve proprioception.
Okay.
You start by figuring out your true baseline.
Right. You measure your foot at full splay. Stand on a piece of paper, put your full weight on your foot, and trace the outline. Measure the widest part across the toes.
Then, measure the insoles of your current shoes.
You will likely find that exact 8 millimeter gap we talked about.
Once you find the gap, you need a shoe that actually fits your 103 millimeter foot. You are looking for a wide toe box and a zero-drop sole.
Zero drop simply means the heel and the toe are at the exact same height from the ground.
Exactly. There is no elevated heel throwing off your alignment or shortening your calf muscles.
Now, let me step in with a strong caution for anyone doing this. If you have been wearing sensory blindfolds and foot corsets for 30 years, your intrinsic muscles are asleep. Your nervous system is used to stomping through heavy padding.
It is used to the crutch.
How can you safely transition to minimalist or zero-drop shoes without overwhelming your freshly unblindfolded nervous system or straining those newly working intrinsic muscles? We do not want people injuring their Achilles tendon on day 3.
That is the most critical part of the protocol. You do not just throw out all your old shoes and go run 5 miles in zero-drop shoes.
Definitely not.
The Ridge paper specifically emphasized a gradual transition. For week 1, the application is just standing and taking very short walks.
So very mild exposure.
Yes, wear the wider shoes around the house or while running a 20-minute errand. You are allowing the mechanoreceptors to send new signals to the brain without overloading the tissue.
It is about dosing the medicine. So what does week 2 look like?
Week 2, you extend that exposure. Maybe an hour of continuous walking. But you must listen to the feedback your feet are giving you.
What kind of feedback?
You will feel muscle soreness in the arches and the calves. That is normal. That is the Hollander morphology happening in real time.
Those intrinsic muscles are waking up and bearing weight.
They are getting physically thicker. Your calf is stretching back to its natural length because you removed the elevated heel.
But there is a massive difference between muscle soreness and joint pain.
A huge difference. If you feel sharp joint pain or tendon pain, you are moving too fast. Tendons and ligaments adapt much slower than muscle tissue.
Because blood flow to tendons is lower.
Exactly, so they need time. The 30 days is about patience and progressive loading. By week 3 and week 4, you can start replacing your daily footwear with the wide toe box shoes for most of the day, continuing to monitor how your body responds.
The action plan is simple. Trace your foot, measure your shoes, acknowledge the gap.
Then, begin exposing the foot to a wide toe box environment in small, manageable doses.
It is a biological remodeling project. You are replacing the cast with a natural environment.
And as that perceptual illusion fades, your balance naturally recalibrates. You will likely find your posture shifts, your hips align differently, and your back feels better.
Because your brain finally knows exactly where the ground is.
Yes.
Which leaves us with a final question for you to ponder. We just spent this deep dive looking at the data on feet. But if just 30 days of letting your toes splay can fundamentally change your balance and muscle morphology, what other physical baselines of the human body have we artificially degraded simply because of standard clothing design?
Brought to you by Joyo Barefoot, research-grade footwear for people rebuilding what shoes took.